The hidden origins of ancient Egypt. What if everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt was a carefully crafted illusion? What if the real story, the original truth, had been buried for over 5,000 years, hidden beneath sand, silence and suppression, waiting for someone to look beyond the surface? For centuries, we've been told the same tale. Egypt began around 300 BC with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under King Narmer. That civilization rose from nothing, and that the pyramids, temples, and pharaohs were simply the result of that sudden spark of ingenuity. But new discoveries are shaking the foundation of that narrative. Archaeologists and researchers around the world are uncovering ancient clues that suggest a much older origin, a forgotten legacy that predates even the earliest known dynasties, pointing to a time when the land of the Nile was already home to something far more advanced than we have been told. This is not just about history. This is about truth, about how our understanding of the past shapes who we are today. Because if Egypt's story is incomplete, then so is humanity's. In this exploration, we will travel back in time, far beyond the textbooks, past the myths, deep into the shadowy origins of the most mysterious civilization on Earth. And by the end, you will understand why this hidden chapter of Egypt's story was never meant to be found. The narrative we've been taught for generations. We have been taught a simple and structured story about the origins of ancient Egypt, a story that begins around 300 BC with a powerful figure named Narmer, also known as Menes, who is said to have united Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom. This moment is often portrayed as the official birth of Egyptian civilization, the starting point of a grand timeline filled with pyramids, pharaohs, and gods carved into stone. According to mainstream history, before this unification, the land of the Nile was home to scattered tribal communities, primitive villages without advanced knowledge or central rule. And then, almost overnight, a fully developed civilization appears, complete with writing systems, architectural mastery, agricultural planning, and complex religious beliefs. This version of history is repeated in textbooks, museums, documentaries, and classrooms around the world. It tells us that everything we associate with Egypt, its grandeur, its monuments, its mysticism, emerged quickly and without any real precursor, as if from a spark in the desert. The pyramids, according to this tale, were built a few hundred years after unification, around 2600 BCE, and are seen as the peak of ancient Egyptian innovation. What's rarely questioned is how such incredible knowledge appeared so suddenly with no clear developmental path before it. We are told to marvel at the achievements of ancient Egyptians, but not to ask what came before them. We're taught to accept the narrative as complete, neat, and closed, as if history begins when it is convenient and ends where it fits the story. But when we begin to dig deeper, both literally and historically, cracks start to appear in this version of events. We start to find hints of something older, something far more complex, something that suggests the Egypt we know was not the beginning, but rather the continuation of a legacy already ancient, even in its own time. This is the myth we've been told, a myth that comforts us with simplicity, but hides the deeper truth beneath layers of time and silence. And to uncover that truth, we must be willing to go where the mainstream narrative refuses to look. Clues from the Pre-Dynastic era, before the age of pharaohs and pyramids, before the first dynasties were recorded, there was a time known as the Pre-Dynastic era, a period stretching back thousands of years before 3100 BCE. And in this forgotten age lie clues that challenge everything we thought we knew about the origins of ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have uncovered mysterious artifacts in regions like Nabta Playa, a site deep in the Nubian desert, where megalithic stone structures have been dated to around 7,000 years ago, long before the supposed beginning of Egyptian civilization. These stones are not randomly placed. They are aligned with astonishing astronomical precision, tracking the movements of stars and marking solstices in ways that suggest a deep understanding of the cosmos. How could a people considered primitive by mainstream history possess such knowledge of the stars, such architectural sophistication, such symbolic awareness? These are not the works of wandering nomads. These are signs of an advanced and organized society with cultural depth and intellectual ambition. In Upper Egypt, near the ancient site of Hierakonpolis, excavations have revealed early temples, burial grounds, and intricate pottery dating back to 4000 BCE or earlier. Some of the burial practices show symbolic elements that resemble those seen in later dynastic rituals, suggesting a continuity of spiritual belief and sacred tradition that predates what textbooks call the start of Egyptian religion. Even older are the mysterious carvings and petroglyphs found in the Sahara, some depicting boats, animals, and humanoid figures with elongated heads. Some researchers believe these figures point to forgotten tribes or cultures that migrated along the Nile and contributed to the DNA of Egyptian civilization long before the time of Narmer. There are even signs of early writing, symbols etched into pottery and stone that may represent a proto-writing system, a kind of early hieroglyphic language used before the formal writing systems of the dynastic period. If true, this would completely shift the timeline of literacy in Egypt and raise questions about where that knowledge came from. What we are beginning to see is not a spontaneous explosion of civilization, but a gradual evolution built upon older foundations, a legacy passed down from unknown hands across centuries of forgotten history. These lost clues are not just scattered artifacts. They are puzzle pieces of a story that has been buried, ignored, or dismissed, not because it lacks evidence, but because it does not fit the convenient version of history we have been told. And as we gather these clues one by one, a new picture of ancient Egypt begins to emerge, one that is far older, far deeper, and far more mysterious than we ever imagined. Inheritance from lost ancestors. As we dig deeper into the origins of ancient Egypt, a striking possibility begins to emerge: the idea that Egypt did not rise in isolation, but may have inherited its knowledge, its culture, and its spiritual systems from far older and now forgotten ancestral civilizations that left behind traces scattered across deserts, buried in ruins, and encoded in ancient myths. One of the most intriguing theories points to a lost civilization that once thrived in the Sahara thousands of years before it became the barren desert we know today. Back then, the Sahara was a lush and fertile land filled with rivers, lakes, and grasslands, a place where communities could thrive and develop over generations. Archaeological discoveries in this region have revealed rock art, tools, and even burial sites that date back over 8,000 years, many of them showing signs of social structure, spiritual practices, and artistic expression. Some researchers believe that when the climate changed and the Sahara began to dry up, these ancient people migrated eastward toward the Nile Valley, bringing with them their knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and sacred geometry. If true, this would mean that the civilization we call ancient Egypt may have been the heir of a much older world, a world erased by time, but not entirely forgotten. Other clues come from the region of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, a site that predates Stonehenge and the pyramids by thousands of years. While not Egyptian, it shows that complex, symbolic, and organized society existed as far back as 10,000 BCE, and it raises an important question. If one advanced culture existed that early in history, could others have existed as well? Could the roots of Egypt stretch all the way back to a lost, global network of ancient wisdom? There are also linguistic and genetic studies that suggest connections between early Egyptians and other distant cultures from Sumer to the Indus Valley. Similarities in religious symbols, creation myths, and architectural motifs hint at a shared ancestral source, or perhaps a forgotten era of cross-cultural exchange. Long before recorded history began, even the Egyptian priest Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, described a line of pre-dynastic rulers called the Shemsu-Hor, or followers of Horus, said to have ruled Egypt for thousands of years before the first official pharaohs. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as myth, yet it echoes ancient traditions around the world that speak of golden ages, divine rulers and civilizations that fell into ruin before ours rose. When you combine these ancient records, scattered artifacts, and strange alignments, a pattern begins to form, a story of inheritance rather than invention, a story in which Egypt was not the beginning, but the rebirth of an older world guided by the memory of its ancestors. And while we may never uncover every piece of that story, the evidence we do have invites us to reconsider everything, to look beyond the familiar and ask whether ancient Egypt was not just a marvel of its own making, but the final echo of something far more ancient, far more profound, and far more forgotten than we have ever dared to believe. Yet our controversial discoveries, Over the past several decades, a number of discoveries have emerged that challenge the conventional timeline of ancient Egypt. Discoveries that are so controversial, many scholars refuse to even acknowledge them, not because they lack evidence, but because they force us to rethink the very foundation of history as we know it. One of the most debated finds is the Sphinx itself, long thought to have been built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. But several researchers, including geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, have argued that the erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx suggest water damage, not wind erosion, meaning it may have been carved during a much wetter period, possibly more than 7,000 years ago. This single detail has ignited a firestorm of debate because if the Sphinx is that old, then the civilization capable of creating it existed long before the dynastic Egyptians. Then there are the unexplained subterranean tunnels and chambers beneath the Giza Plateau, mentioned in ancient texts and explored in part during restricted excavations. Some of these tunnels appear to connect different parts of the Giza complex and lead to chambers that remain sealed or unexplored. Rumors persist about hidden archives or technologies buried there, possibly relics from a civilization lost to history. Yet these possibilities are largely dismissed or left unspoken by mainstream institutions. In the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, a mysterious set of carvings has stirred intense controversy. The so-called Abydos hieroglyphs appear to depict advanced vehicles, what look like helicopters, submarines, and flying machines. While some dismiss them as palimpsests or overlapping hieroglyphs created over time, others argue they represent a knowledge far ahead of its time, raising questions about whether ancient Egyptians were preserving a memory of technologies they did not create. Another controversial topic is the Osireion at Abydos, a megalithic structure made of granite blocks weighing up to 100 tons, fitted with extreme precision and lying beneath the level of the surrounding temple. This style of construction appears far older than the rest of the site, with no inscriptions, no records of who built it, and no clear explanation for how such massive stones were moved and placed. Many believe the Osireion was a legacy structure, inherited by the dynastic Egyptians from a much older civilization. Even the timeline of the pyramids is under question, with some researchers suggesting the alignments to celestial bodies point to construction dates much earlier than 2600 BCE. The three pyramids at Giza are aligned with Orion's belt in a way that perfectly matches the sky as it appeared around 500 BCE. If this alignment was intentional, it suggests the builders were not just engineers, but astronomers with knowledge of precession and stellar cycles far ahead of their time. These discoveries are not isolated. They are part of a growing body of evidence that something does not add up, and yet they are treated as fringe theories, ridiculed or ignored. Not because they are wrong, but because they challenge the comfortable story that has been accepted for centuries. We are taught that history is a solid timeline carved in stone, but these controversial findings reveal just how much is still hidden, how much may have been buried not just by sand and time, but by silence and denial. And the question remains, why is there such resistance to exploring these ideas? What are we afraid of discovering? And what truths about our ancient past are waiting in the shadows, ready to be revealed when we finally have the courage to look, bricking the hidden agenda? If the roots of ancient Egypt truly stretch back to a forgotten age, and if powerful evidence exists hidden in plain sight, then the next question we must ask is, what has been covered up? And more importantly, why? Throughout history, those in control have often shaped the narrative of the past to fit their own agendas. Knowledge is power, and whoever controls the story of where we come from often controls where we believe we can go. Many ancient texts and records have been lost, destroyed, or locked away from public view. The Library of Alexandria, once home to the world's greatest collection of ancient knowledge, was burned to the ground, erasing countless scrolls, books, and records from the memory of humanity. What secrets were lost in those flames? What ancient truths were destroyed before we ever had a chance to understand them? Even today, certain discoveries are kept hidden, restricted, or dismissed without fair investigation. Researchers who challenge the mainstream view are often discredited, labeled as conspiracy theorists, or denied funding and access. It begs the question, are we protecting history, or protecting a version of history that keeps us comfortable and unquestioning? One of the possible reasons for this cover-up is the fear of rewriting everything we think we know. If ancient civilizations were far older, far more advanced, and more interconnected than we have been taught, then the foundations of archaeology, anthropology, and even religion would have to be re-examined. Institutions built on long-accepted timelines would be forced to admit that they got it wrong, and that kind of shift is threatening to those who have built their careers and reputations on the old story. Another reason may be tied to the spiritual knowledge of the ancients. If the Egyptians inherited teachings from an older world, then these teachings might hold keys to consciousness, energy, or human potential that modern science still doesn't understand. Revealing this could upset not just historical frameworks, but scientific, philosophical, and spiritual ones as well. Imagine if humanity once possessed a deeper awareness of the universe and lost it through cataclysm, conflict, or control. Who would want that truth buried and why? There are also geopolitical motives. Ancient sites hold cultural and national significance, and questioning their origins can lead to political tension. If evidence emerged that foreign civilizations influenced or founded what we call ancient Egypt, it would challenge national pride, historical ownership, and global narratives of identity and origin. But despite all efforts to suppress it, truth has a way of resurfacing. The cracks in the official story are widening, and more people are starting to ask questions. More are daring to challenge the silence, because deep down we all sense that the story we've been told is incomplete. This is not about fantasy, it's about curiosity. It's about honoring the legacy of our ancestors, not as primitive people lost to time, but as wise beings who may have once held the secrets to life, the stars and the soul, secrets we are only just beginning to rediscover. And so, as we stand at the edge of history with eyes open and minds awakened, we must ask ourselves what else has been hidden. And are we finally ready to uncover the truth that has waited patiently for over 5,000 years, an awakening to a deeper truth? As we reach the end of this journey into the forgotten origins of ancient Egypt, we are left not with answers but with deeper questions. And perhaps that is where true understanding begins, not in certainty, but in wonder. Not in finality, but in the willingness to explore what has been hidden. For too long, history has been treated like a closed book, a timeline carved in stone. But the more we dig, the more we realize that history is alive, fragile and incomplete, buried beneath layers of sand, fear, and denial. We were told a version of Egypt that begins around 300 BC, with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, with pharaohs, pyramids, and hieroglyphs. But what if that was only the last chapter of a much older story? A story that stretches back to a civilization lost in time. A people who understood the stars, who mastered stone with impossible precision, who encoded knowledge into temples, myths, and monuments so it could survive long after their world disappeared. When we look at the Great Sphinx, the Osireion, the pyramids of Giza, we are not just looking at buildings. We are looking at messages, at symbols left behind, at echoes of a voice that refuses to be silenced, a voice that speaks of a deeper past, a more complex human story, a legacy that belongs to all of us. And now in this age of rediscovery, we are being called to listen, to challenge what we think we know, to re-examine the story of human civilization, and to ask the questions that make institutions uncomfortable, but make truth possible. This is not about believing in myths. It is about being brave enough to question the myths we've been told. It is about realizing that history is not just about dates and kings, but about who we are, where we come from, and what we are capable of. Because if the ancients truly did possess lost knowledge, if they truly lived through cycles of rise and fall, if they left behind clues meant for future generations, then we have a responsibility to honor that gift, not with blind belief, but with open eyes and an awakened spirit. Maybe the greatest discovery is not buried in the sands of Egypt, but within ourselves, in the courage to unlearn, to dig deeper, to see beyond the surface, and to awaken the memory of who we truly are. So the next time you hear the official version of history, remember, it may only be a piece of the puzzle. The real story is waiting beneath the silence, beneath the sand, and perhaps beneath your own skin. The past is not dead. It is not even past. It lives in us, calls to us, and waits patiently for the day we are ready to listen again.